Welcome to the channel. This is part one of a two-part series where we're going to take a fairly in-depth look into the waste management mechanism in Workers and Resources Soviet Republic. Now, part one will consist of a section on what waste actually is, and that's quite very important to understand. Then there will be a section on the tech tree, and then there will be a fairly large section on waste collection, and then the final section will be on what I would call the hidden gem of the waste management system, and that is the transfer building. Now, if you're interested in the more advanced levels of waste disposal and recycling, that will be covered in part two. Now, before we get into the first section, I just want to mention a couple of things. The first thing is that I'm recording this on the full release, which was put into the stable branch on the 31st of July 2023. So what we're looking at now is the final release plus any hot fixes which are done afterwards. And the second thing is that while I'm saying that this is not an in-depth look, I'm not going to pretend that this is a tutorial, because waste management is a very deep subject. It is a game changer if you are a regular player of the game. And more importantly, it's got so many different permutations about how waste can be collected and managed. Because one of the important things that you need to understand about waste management, it is a complete game changer. And how you actually implement the different mechanics depends very much on the size of the city, its location on the map, and more importantly, what industries it actually supports. And then that actually then kind of defines how you actually implement your waste management. So moving on to the first section, which I've entitled "What is Waste?" And one thing that's very important to be able to implement an effective waste management system is actually understanding of what waste actually is. Simply because some of the biggest mistakes I made when I first started implementing waste was by making certain assumptions, not really understanding the nature of what waste is. Now, waste itself consists of what I would call two composite types, which is mixed waste and hazardous waste. Now, hazardous waste has a special condition, which I will talk about. And these two composite types is the output of any building that produces waste. And buildings that produce waste actually have workers in them, either living as in a residence like this, or as in a factory such as this. So wherever you've got workers or the potential for workers, I'll explain that when we get down to collection, will produce mixed waste. And I've only found two exceptions so far. One is this mod here. It's a water treatment plant, which for some reason doesn't produce mixed waste, but it produces hazardous waste. Now, that could be a quirk of the fact that this mod was created before the waste update was actually released. Then the other one, for some reason, is churches don't produce any waste at all. But the general rule is if it's a building, if it has workers in it or the potential to have workers in it, it will produce mixed waste. Now, hazardous waste is another composite waste, which is produced by hospitals. So if you come into any hospitals like that, you'll see it produces hazardous waste. And the example I've just used with the water treatment plant, if you have a building that uses chemicals, there's a very good chance that they will also produce hazardous waste as well. And that applies to chemical factories like this one down here. Come down here, you can see it produces hazardous waste. And also, I think, is it plastic factories? Yeah, plastic factories or chemical plants. I think, is it plastic factories? Yeah, plastic factories contain hazardous waste as well. So that's your source of all waste in the game. Waste comes from buildings. It always starts off as either mixed waste or hazardous waste in its form within the buildings. Now, of course, obviously there's separation, but I'll talk about that in the section on collection. Now, the important thing to remember is that mixed waste itself, we come to here, is always a composite of what I would call the specific types of waste. Now, specific types of waste can be split into two sections. One section I've called usable waste. This is construction waste, which can be turned into gravel, metallic waste, which can be turned into steel, aluminium waste that can be turned into aluminium, plastic waste that can be turned into plastic, biological waste that can be turned into fertilizer. And then we've got three types of what I called other waste. That's burnable waste, other waste, and ash. So what that means is if you go round the map, and look at any mixed waste, it will be a combination of those specific types of waste. In this case, you can see that this mixed waste stored here is biological waste burnable as other waste. Now, you on the right hand side, you will see that there's some percentages. What these percentages are intended to do is give you an idea of what the content of the mixed waste actually is. So using this example, you can see that the percentages are split into 0, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 and 50%. So when you see this where it says metal scrap greater than 0, what it's saying is that the metal scrap content of this mixed waste is between 0 and 5. And if you see in the case of this hazardous waste, the metal scrap is between 10 and 15%. The biological waste is between 20 and 30%. The burnable waste is between 20 and 30%. The hazardous waste is between 15 and 20%. And the other waste is between 10 and 15. So those greater than percentages are an advantage, but I've never seen it greater than 50%. So the best thing to assume is that when a waste is greater than 50%, that's by far the greatest bulk of that type of waste within that mixed waste. Now, as I've already shown you, hazardous waste is produced by these buildings here. The important thing to understand about the hazardous waste is that hazardous waste is also a composite waste. That means that hazardous waste where it's produced, i.e. in this hospital, is a mixture of metallics, all the other specific wastes. It can be any combination you want, but it contains hazardous waste as a specific entity. Now, you can't make anything from hazardous waste. All you can do is remove it from hazardous waste, the composite container on the outside. And when you remove hazardous waste, it becomes mixed waste. Now, the trap of which I fell into very early in the game when my first attempt at processing is where you can remove hazardous waste to turn it into mixed waste. But what you can also do is if you add hazardous waste to mixed waste, you get hazardous waste. And by that, I'll just show you a very early mistake that I actually made. I built a dump down here. Now, in my naivety, what I did is I sent all the mixed waste and hazardous waste to this dump. It was an interim dump just because I was implementing it and I needed someone to get rid of the waste very, very quickly. And I thought, well, I'll just send the two, and what I'd get is what was here. I would get this with a percentage of hazardous waste, but it would still be mixed waste. But what actually happened is this dump effectively became a hazardous waste dump, and what that meant is that I was effectively turning all my mixed waste output from this town here into hazardous waste, and that's by far the biggest trap. So if you don't take anything else away from this video, guys, whenever you are working with waste, make sure that you keep your mixed waste and hazardous waste completely separate. Now, the next thing I want to just kind of mention is this fact that you've got this element of separation within here with your mixed waste. You've got other bits and pieces in here, and as I've already alluded to, that your usable waste can be processed in the appropriate plant into gravel, steel, aluminium, plastic. But I want to talk a little bit about biological waste, because again, this is something that's very important, especially if you want to make your own fertilizer. That is the fact that the only way that you can separate biological waste from mixed waste is at the point of collection. And this is quite important. This is why these buildings come into it. You can see this building now doesn't contain biological waste. But if I look at the actual building itself, sometimes it will give itself away. You can see here that stored within the building, you've got the more than 20% biological waste, between 20 and 30% biological waste. So the only way you can separate out biological waste from mixed waste is at the point of collection. This is very important. There is no other building where you can separate out biological waste. So if you want to make fertilizer, it's very important that you set up that collection process. The other thing I want to kind of just talk about is what I've called the other wastes. Now, other wastes can be purely random, as I've kind of illustrated already. If we come into here, you can see burnable waste and other waste can show up in any situation on any map. All these buildings will produce different types of waste. You can see here, this heating plant is producing biological waste, burnable waste, other waste, and ash, because it's burning something. And so if you've got a building that's burning something, you can often get ash from it as well. And just to show you there as well, this one's greater than 20% ash. Now, what's worth noting about what I've called the other waste, which is burnable waste, other waste and ash, is you can't get anything from it. All you've got to do is dispose of it. Now, the biggest source of ash is the incinerator. You can see you can actually get pure ash from it, but be aware that whether this comes out pure depends on what you put in. And this is the final characteristic of waste that I want to kind of talk about is once you get into processing waste, what you get out is often the product of what you put in and the type of building you're putting it into. In the same way as I said that I mixed up my mixed waste and hazardous waste, if you've gone to the trouble of separating out the waste to useful waste, be careful where you put it. Because if you just dump it into another dump, what you can effectively do is turn it back into mixed waste again. And I've actually done that a couple of times by accident, just by not setting up the right disposal points. Because what I will say is that the technical offices that collect waste can, if you get the setting of where they want to dispose of it, and just to kind of illustrate that, if I show you here, if you come here, what you'll see is you can dispose of wastes in all different locations. But if you send the waste to the same common dump, even after you've separated it, what will happen is you will turn it back into mixed waste. Now, the final thing I want to talk about in this section is a bit of a curiosity. That is that whenever you put waste into a dump, it will slowly decompose. Just trying to look for, where is it? Over here. I've got another hazardous dump here, and you can see what we've got here. So, and what happens is if you leave the waste in there long enough, it will slowly decompose away. But what I will say is don't rely on this as a way to dispose of your waste, simply because it is a very slow process. This waste dump has been slowly decomposing away for a couple of years, I think. This is my second hazardous dump because I filled up the first one. What will happen is that whenever you put waste into a dump, it will slowly decompose. And now the reason I'm talking about that is that biological waste, I can't show it to you here. I'll just flip very quickly up to the top of the map just to show you. I've got a biological dump here. And what happens is if I put it over here, you can see this contains greater than 50% fertilizer. So biological waste is an exception in the sense that if you put biological waste into a dump, what will happen is it will slowly turn into fertilizer, and then you can actually use the fertilizer. That's a very good tip to understand, guys, that you can get fertilizer for free, which is more than enough to supply a single farm. But of course, there's also, you can actually turn biological waste into fertilizer using the composting plant. So it's important to understand that if you're storing waste and you put it into a dump or a claw storage thing, which is this thing, which is technically a dump of claw, it will slowly decompose and fade away. So you will get losses. And what that means is that if you are wanting to set up a recycling plant and you want maximum efficiency, what you've actually got to do is put the waste into other forms of storage, such as an aggregate store here. I think an open store also holds waste. If I just double check that just to show it to you. Where's the open store? The open storage will hold plastic waste. I think it's construction waste, aluminium waste and metallic waste can be stored in an aggregate store. That's also a good way to ensure that you keep your waste separate, because once you put your waste into an aggregate store or an open store, the rules of what vehicles will pick up and drop off change, because obviously these don't store mixed waste, so the waste has to be kept separate. I think that's enough for this section. I've probably gone on a lot longer, and I will repeat some of these points when we get into the basic collection. Now, the next section we're going to do is talk about research, because research is very important for waste processing, and it's quite very important to actually understand it, because when you first look at research, It's easy to get confused. The waste processing is all done in a technical university. That's why it's got the blue squares on it. And what you'll see is the first one, it says processing and disposal of waste, expected research duration 1,000 days. Study about the ways that garbage could be processed and recycled. Now, this doesn't really unlock anything. This is the placekeeper to open up the two branches. Now, the first significant form of waste research you're going to do is called waste separation, and you can see expected research duration 1,200 days. It says research about ways how to mutually separate the waste. After this, we will be able to build a facility to separate the waste. Now, that it refers to this general waste separation plant, which is this building here. So what that means is that you can separate the waste from mixed waste in this point, but you won't be able to separate the biological waste, because what this does is it actually separates all these bits here. So that's why I was emphasizing that you have to get the biological waste at the top, but you can't get the biological waste until you've done waste separation edification. Now, what this is you can see it takes 1,500 days to research. It says campaign and propagation of why the citizens and organizations to separate waste. After this, citizens will be separate waste into special containers while available. Now, the special containers that the game is referencing is these stands for collection of waste. And if I come up to here, these are the stands that I've been kind of clicking on where you actually put it in. So, for example, here. Now, the important thing to understand is that until you can build these from the get-go, but you cannot actually separate out biological waste or any other type of waste beyond mixed waste and hazardous waste until you've completed this research. So what will happen is that if you build this before that research is finished, you will get a message up here saying that you don't have the required tech to do it, but you can still use it to collect mixed waste and hazardous waste. You just can't. So that is the separation. This is probably the most powerful tech that you want to get to if you really want to start moving towards processing your own waste. Now, the ones below here, metallic scrap separation, plastic recycling, aluminium recycling, steel recycling, refers to the actual recycling buildings across here. Now, these aren't quite so urgent, because what you're starting to talk about is getting into recycling, and then you've got the logistics and all the other elements which will be required to what you actually do with the waste. So these are, I wouldn't say these are high priority techs. The top three are the ones you want to do almost as soon as you get an opportunity. These ones are nice to haves as your economy grows. And to be honest, I wouldn't even worry too much about these until you've got a working population up here of an excess of 10,000, and even then maybe not even that. Now, the final one down here is energy from waste. That is these buildings here, power plants and heating plants. I would say this is a very low priority tech to research, because one thing I've found by integrating this into a large economy, yes, you get a lot of waste and you separate it, but bearing in mind that these plants here, like this power plant, is going to require 60 tons of mixed waste to generate 660 megawatts of power. Now, I can't really show you the consumption, but if I click on here and show you, this plant here is burning 56 tons of mixed waste once the save game is gone, and you can see it's handling it very, very easily. And this is something, so you're going to need a very big economy to be able to entrust a heating plant burning your waste. It feels safe, and to be honest, so I mean, if you want to go for it, guys, feel free. Anyway, that's this section. So what I'm going to do now is just move on to the next section. In this section, what we're going to be doing is taking a deeper dive into the collection side of the waste processing mechanic. Now, for the purposes of this section, I'm making two assumptions. The first one is to do with technology, and if I'm coming in here and I'm going to assume that well, I've already done it, but for the purposes of the description, you need to understand that the waste separation edification tech has been researched. And what this does is allows separation at the point of collection. The other thing also is that I'm using what you would call the basic starter waste disposal system here for both the two towns that we're going to be looking at, which is the general strategy is you just dump the waste across the border. In fact, you sell it. And that keeps the waste disposal system very, very simple. And it means that for the purposes of this section, waste disposal, all waste is just taken away and disposed on the border. So bear in mind those assumptions while I'm actually talking. As I say, if there's any deviation, I will mention it specifically. Now, to begin with, what I want to do is just give an overview of the actual way that waste is collected. Every building that contains workers or potential workers will produce mixed waste. And what you'll see is that domestic buildings or small buildings will have small waste containers with a very limited capacity of 0.12 tons. Now, industries have large containers. If I click on this food factory here, what you'll see is that this has a large storage container with a capacity of 7.5 tons. Now, now what I will show you is that this gravel processing plant also has a large container, but it has a capacity of 24.5 tons. And this is something that you do need to understand from the beginning. Small containers are fixed at 0.12, but the large container output for industries and also your actual specific pickup stands for big garbage can also have will use large containers and small containers. So when you're placing these, you do need to be aware of which one is which. Now, I did kind of say that buildings that have potential workers also generate waste, and this is something that you do need to be aware of. A gravel quarry will produce mixed waste. It says here internal garbage container stand. That's because it's got potential workers. So if you use the standard thing of putting an excavator in here, be aware that you still need to be able to collect waste from your quarries. That also applies to your bauxite mines, because I know that a lot of people mine with just excavators, but what you will see is that it will also produce waste. The second thing I want to mention at the very basic level, or buildings that produce mixed waste, as I already said, but hospitals and factories that use chemicals will also produce hazardous waste. So when you first start the game and you're at the very basic level, you haven't done the research, you've got no separation, you've still got to deal with two types of waste, which is the mixed waste and the hazardous waste. So that is the really basic principles of how waste is generated and how it's initially stored for collection. Now, before we get into how we actually collect it, I just want to show you two useful overlays. One is up here. It's called waste, and what I suggest is what you want to do is put overlay always on. What this does is it gives you an overlay of how much waste is in each building, and this is very important because when you're actually designing your collection system, and especially when you start, what you're looking for is potential hotspots. Now, why potential hotspots comes down to the fact that waste is not a constant within a building. Waste is actually generated by workers, and there's of course there's that little bit of waste that's generated by the quarries. So you can't get away by not having any workers. But the rate of what waste is produced depends on the number of workers and the activity of an industry. And of course, if you think about it, that is actually related to your numbers of workers as well. Just to give you an example, this building holds 160 people, but that doesn't mean this is producing waste from 160 people. What it means is the workers who are currently in the building will produce the waste. So that means that even some quite large residential buildings will produce waste very slowly. For industry, again, like I've already mentioned, is that the amount of activity defines the amount of waste being produced. So like this gravel processing plant is is almost in hibernation, because what this is really doing is just producing the gravel for the building repair structure. So I've shut this right down, so it's producing minimal gravel, and of course you can see it's completely clogged up. So the amount of waste that it's actually producing is very low. But if I come down to the industries over the hill here, what you'll see is like a power plant produces a fairly steady amount of waste, but again it depends on how many workers you've got in here, of how much waste that's going, and of course how much power you're generating. Now heating is quite interesting as well, because like at the moment we're in August, so you can see here the amount of waste that's being generated is very small, where even though that you've got a full work staff in here. And in fact, if I speed this up, you may even at high speed, you might be struggle to see this actually go forward. But don't be deceived, guys, because when winter comes, this will be producing a lot more waste. And that also kind of comes round to gravel processing. You see, we've got a bit more activity here. If I speed this one up, you'll probably see the amount of waste being produced. Again, it's not producing that much, but no, this one's not going to oblige me either, is it? And this is something you do need to be aware of, guys, that the amount of waste generated is the amount of activity and the number of workers. And what that is reflected in is that what you will find is that places like universities, if I let the game run, will often produce waste a lot quicker, because not only have they got lots of workers in here, they've also got lots of students. In fact, this one's quite busy. It's a bit overloaded, actually. That also applies to orphanages. So be aware that if you've got an orphanage, that you will get a lot of people in there. That also applies to prisons, as up in here. So if I come up to here, what you'll see is if we got a prison on this corner, or we don't have many prisoners in here, but you'll see the amount of waste being produced depends on whether you've got a full complement of warders and a full stock of prisoners. So this is something you do need to bear in mind, guys. In fact, this one's probably, no, even this one isn't. Maybe I'm trying to find a good example of waste production. This one's obviously my education levels are quite high, not that high. So just to reiterate, guys, don't be deceived when you're planning your waste collection system. Especially with industry, always plan for the worst, because it can catch you out. And this is why this overlay is so important, because what you're looking for is hotspots like this. And what this is that this is now full up. And you can see you get a message here. It says garbage container overfilled, health risk. If you get lots of buildings like this, now if this is just for a short term, the health risk is quite low. But if you're getting lots of yellow, and even worse, if you're getting red, your health of your population will be hit very hard. And I'm not kidding, guys. I made a mistake of getting a whole group of reds because I was messing around with the collection system, and the health in these places dropped down very, very quickly. Shops again can fill up very quickly, especially if you've got lots of people in shopping. So watch your shopping malls as well. Now the other overlay I want to show you is actually in city planning. If I come here and we click on that, and of course I've got no actual collection sites in here, but once you start using these buildings here, which is the garbage containers external, highlight any building that has a connection to an external waste collection site. So when you're actually planning a city, what you can do is use this to make sure that you've got coverage. So like, for example, here, these buildings are not covered. But one tip I will give you guys is don't get completely obsessed with trying to get the whole town, city, wherever it is, completely covered. What you want to do is use the first overlay to look for the hotspots to fill in the gaps. The one thing I will say is that probably when you first start out, one of your priority buildings for putting one of these in, putting in a external source, is hospitals. So that's two very useful overlays that you want to do. Hopefully that gives you an understanding of the task that you've got to carry out. What I'm going to do now is just go to how you actually get round to collecting the waste, and that is by using technical offices. And what the technical offices do, they work in the same way as like water collection. If you played the game, they've got a range up to 3,000 meters. One tip I will say is just make sure you check your range, make sure that all the buildings that generate waste actually is in range, because if they're not in range, the garbage will not be, the waste will not be collected. And more importantly, you can't send a manual truck up to empty that waste. The only building that will collect internal waste, and I want to emphasize internal waste because there is a subtle difference, which I'll talk about in part 2 of this series, is the technical office. Now the technical office requires specific waste trucks. There's two types of them. There's small garbage trucks and large garbage trucks. But before we get into talking about the difference between the two types of garbage trucks, what I want to give you a tip, guys, is when you're planning your waste collection, build a specific actual waste technical office. Don't mix it with your snow plows or your water, because even in a relatively small town like this, with a population, I think the population is about 2,000, and you can see here that the technical office, all the trucks are out, and we've got 8 trucks here, and you can see, and the profile will depend on what you're collecting. And obviously, because this town is in basic mode, and we've got only some certain amount of light industry, what I've got is 6 small garbage trucks and 2 big ones. The small garbage trucks is to go around the towns, picking up the small stands here, and the 2 big ones are actually going to pick up the industries. Before I get into showing you how the trucks actually work, I just want to emphasize one point now. Because these are called small garbage trucks and large garbage trucks, it doesn't, small and large don't refer to the carry capacity. It refers to the size of container that actually gets picked up. And just to illustrate that, now bear in mind that I'm in 1992, so I've got some fairly big garbage trucks. You can see that this small garbage truck here, it tells you whether they're small or large, actually has a carry capacity of 9 tons. And the actual large container here, most of them always seem to default to 6.5 tons. So, and I think that's based on the fact that they all look like what we call in the UK here skip lorries, and skip lorries have a fixed load. So your garbage trucks, your small garbage trucks will vary in size. Like we got one here for 6.5 tons. This one carries 9 tons. This one actually carries 15 tons. And if you want to go for the big real stuff, this is a mod by Nova, and it will actually pick up 38 tons of garbage. But to be honest, this is a bit too much. But it does have a use for when you're actually getting down to moving garbage when you're actually doing your recycling. So you've got your 2 types of truck. They both got a specific role to do. And I'm actually going to start with the large truck, because I've noticed that this truck has just left the container. And you can see that he's actually going to the wood pulp extraction. So if we actually follow this guy, now the way large trucks work is they always do a single collection. So if we follow this guy to the point, so a large garbage truck will go out to a building and actually pick up a specific load. Yes, so he's going to here. If you actually watch this, he will pick up that load, and he will pick up the 6.5 ton load. And generally what they will do is they won't go to any industrial building until there is a full load waiting for this truck. Occasionally I've seen them get a little bit strange. It's probably the polite way of saying it, but generally the rule is that these will wait in the technical office, like this one here. So he's just waiting, and he will wait until, say, for example, this food processing plant reaches about 6.5 ton and he has a full load. They are fairly efficient. Now the small garbage trucks, what they do is we pick up this guy and we follow him. What these do is they wander around the actual town, going from building to building where there's a load to pick up. Looks like this guy's decided he wants to go to the border. I think this is evidence that there's too many trucks in this point, but generally what they will do is they will wander around. I think what will happen is that they will go to the border if there's no actual surpluses, but what you will find is that they're only picking up very small amount. And what you'll see is this container's full. So he goes in, they will pick up the full containers. So they generally won't go to a building to pick up the waste until that container is actually full. So if we go here now, so you can see now he's going to the customs shed. But there is a way to fix that, guys. That will be what I'll be talking about in the last part of this video. So what you've got is you've got your large trucks going out, picking up their 6.5 tons. You've got your small trucks wandering around. Now, one thing you do need to be aware of is, and this is something that will actually why you can sometimes get problems here with the hazardous waste filling up here. You can see it's overloaded. The reason for that is that these small trucks won't mix the waste. So this will fill up and to a point, and then it will have to wait until one of these small trucks come out here and pick up. And that is a good segue into why would you use these pickup points. And if I come back to the overlay and we switch that back on again, turn on that so you can see it. What you'll see is that what we got here is the hospital, and it's full up, and it's going to keep filling up simply because it's got this problem with the fact that a specific truck has to decide, one of these has to come here and pick it up. So this is when you start using these actual external pickup points. Now there's two types. There's small ones, containers for small, and ones for big garbage. Now what you'll see in here is you've got ones which have road connections, and then if you look very carefully, I don't know if you guys can see the icons, some have footpaths. What you need to be aware of is the small ones only take mixed waste, so there's no point putting one of these. Thank you, game. There's no point putting one of these next to the hospital because it won't pick up the hazardous waste. The other thing also is that they come in two varieties, road-based and footpath-based. But what you can do is put in one of the large containers. And what I'm going to do, maybe we can just get in the road one. What I will say, guys, is this can be very fiddly. Get into here. We get in stand for large containers, large. We can get that in there. What you can do is just squeeze these in like that. And what you have is actually arranged. Now, one tip I will give you is if for some reason you drop it and then you can't actually find the range, if you come to here, it will give you the range of there. And what you're looking for is 165 meters. If I go back to here, just put in a small stand, and quite a small stand. I put in a small stand. No, I want one with footpath here. What you'll see is that you will get the range. Now, this is a very compact town. This is one of the reasons why I've left it in the basic mode, is trying to get these in is very difficult. But what you can do is just squeeze them in with the footpath. The trucks will go up and down the footpath, so there's no problems from that point of view. So that is something that you do need to consider when you're planning a new town. Because I'm retrofitting this, so that's the way it's going. And what I'll do is I'll just very quickly, I should be able to auto build this of the road as well. And what you'll find now is I put this container in here. Now, one thing you need to remember is that the actual container, you see how quickly it's filling up now because it's drawing there. But if you want it to collect hazardous waste, what you've got to do is select that building there. Now, one thing you need to be aware of is that if you have not researched the edification tech, if you try to, what you'll have up here is a message telling you that you cannot separate waste. So before you've researched the tech, the only two containers that you can have in here is mixed waste and hazardous waste. But once you've actually done the tech, what you can do then is actually switch these on. And probably the one that you use most in the beginning is biological waste if you want to create fertilizer. Can't go back down to zero? Didn't know that. Oh well, got stuck with some biological waste there. What I'm going to have to do now is change my technical office because whenever you set one of these up, if you do set up this separation like I've just done, and it's picking up a lot of biological waste, what I've got to do is set this dump, this one. Luckily, just up here, I've got a biological plant, and so that's another truck that you can fall in, guys. When you're setting these up, especially once you get to advanced waste collection, make sure that you update all your technical offices to deal with that actual specialist waste. Otherwise, it just won't get collected. And what you'll see now is that this is now filling up really quickly. But what you will get now, bear in mind that these are small containers, so the small trucks have still got to come here. So while this is fairly efficient because it actually protects the building here, what you'll see now is I've got myself in a little bit of a situation here because this is fill up. And if you actually show it now, what you see, this is something. What happens is that if this fills up and it's still producing biological waste, what it will do is start filling up this container again. So what I'm going to have to do is increase that. So just because you build these doesn't necessarily mean that these won't fill up. So again, that's another consideration you need to do. What I really should have done is put in a big one here. But you can see this guy will come in. Now if you watch this truck picking up, what he will do, he actually picked up a little bit. Oh, come on, game. What you should, because what will happen is that they will come in here and they will pick up multiple containers. But obviously that guy felt he didn't need it. It might take a little while to settle down. Okay, let's just turn around. Right, we've just got one go in, right? Now watch. These trucks will come in and clear the entire container, but what they won't do is come in until there's a full load. So I suppose maybe what I should have done is set 3 of these in. Besides, also you get a nice cool graphic to, if you're not sure what a container, what is actually being collected here. The green ones are hazardous, bio, and I think if you switch on other ones, you get different colours to which give you a graphical view of what each one is collecting. So when you're first starting out, I would strongly recommend that you actually protect the hospitals, because the trucks can be a little bit slow picking up the small amounts of hazardous waste. And I think that covers the starter town. And this is kind of now at a point where I would say that unless there's some other hotspots showing up, like this school here, because again, it's got lots of children in it. This is what you'd probably do with your first starter town. Now, what I want to do is go over to Ironton over here and show you something which has been a little bit more custom built, a little bit more sophisticated, and in the sense of with the exterior collection points. And if I actually just turn off the overlay, turn off there. Now, Ironton here is still dumping its waste to the border, with one exception. That is the fact that it's actually collecting biological waste from, and in this point here. We'll come back to this setup in the final section of this video. And what I've got here, because this is such a big town and we've got quite a lot of industry, and we've actually got 2 waste collection offices going here. And the way I've set these up is that this one's got a bit more emphasis on the industry, partly because what we've got up here is a coal mine. And one thing you want to be aware of with coal mines is that you get a lot more construction waste from mines and ore processing. In fact, the short of actually demolition, mines and ore processing is a big source of construction waste, but that doesn't mean that not all buildings produce it. And what we got here is, let's say, a bit more of a sophisticated setup. And if I show you the overlay, you come to here, click this on, turn this on. What you'll see is I've got a lot more coverage now. And what way I built this coverage up is by exactly what I've just done up above. I was looking for hot spots and dealt with the problem areas as and when they developed, rather than just banging down lots and lots of these collection sites. And what you'll see here is, I'll just turn this off again because we don't need it. I've got a series of quite big buildings here. So what I've done is I've put the more bigger collection sites in here. These are the ones which are here. These are the ones here. These always have a road connection. There's no footpath option with this. But the advantage is that even the small one and the big one actually separate. And you can see this one here, which is this one here, is got a capability of storing 123 tons. I think it says in here that it's 156 tons actually. Is it? Yeah, it says 156 tons. But that's probably one of the anomalies. And so when you've got a large concentration of big buildings that have big populations, it pays to put in these. And of course, each one of these containers holds 6.5 tons of waste, or it represents a full load. And of course, the big trucks won't come to this until these actually fill up. And the way this is set up is that I put hazardous waste in just as, well, I've got a bit of a habit with where I've got these big ones, is I put a hazardous waste in just in case any of these buildings produce hazardous waste. And what this one is doing is primarily collecting the mixed waste, but it's also picking up biological waste, which is then going to be sent on to be turned into fertilizer. And as I say, I've got 2 actual technical offices. This one has got a higher percentage of small vehicles because I've still got a number of small dumps in here. This leads me into one potential trap which I did fall into, when I was actually building this city was I started putting these in, and I got started to get a bit carried away with some of the bigger dumps. And what happened was is that I didn't have enough large trucks to actually cover industry and the big pickup points that I put in. So when you're actually putting in these exterior collection points, be prepared to adjust your actual mix of types of small and large garbage trucks. In fact, what I would suggest is that when you're actually building your town up, is don't buy all 8 trucks at one time, simply because you may want to adjust it according to what types of containers you can get in. In the case of when I was doing this city, it was a matter of actually trying to fit them in because I was retrofitting the waste management system. So it gave me a little bit of a problem. So you can see how I managed to get the one in here. This is picking up the hazardous waste from the hospital. There's also a clinic over here that's not, there's a clinic here, I'm sure it is. There's the clinic here. And what this one is also picking up hazardous waste as well. So I think that's about it for waste collection. What I would suggest is that, again, the 3 main constituents you're going to do when you're not really starting to recycle is mixed waste, biological waste and hazardous waste in appropriate places. If I just show you an overview of this one, just to kind of wind this section up, if we go to here and turn that on, what you'll find is that generally we've got a fairly good coverage. It's all green. And if I switch back to this one here, just to give you a bit of an example, what you see is there's a block here, right, which is not covered, but if I show it in here, you can see it's still only got the minimum 0.12 tons of a garbage kind of pickup point, and this has got a population of 314, and this is a fairly good example of the fact that despite this having 314 people in it, the rate of garbage piling up in here is relatively slow. I mean, obviously it's going to fill up, but the garbage truck should get here. There it is. He's bang on cue. Look at that. Just clear that out. So that's a good example that even if you've got big residential buildings, that the rate of garbage piling up can be quite low. But then on the converse side, if you've got a cluster of kindergartens, clinics and shops, the rate of garbage piling up in here could be relatively quick. You can see here it's putting on 0.1 almost by game tick. And then the reason for that is that you've got lots of children in here, you've got lots of customers coming in here. This is quite a busy store, and probably this one here as well. This one doesn't have so many shoppers in it. So what you want to do is, when you're first starting out, is, and in fact when you're actually planning your first town, your areas of concentrations of people will definitely need these external collection points, and this is something that you do need to build into your design. And I think I better stop now, guys, otherwise I'm just going to spend the next half hour talking about some of the other design decisions. And this winds up this section on the tips and traps of setting up your collection site. For the final section in this video, I've moved to my tourist town, because it was the tourist town that awakened me to what I think is the hidden gem of the waste management system. And by the hidden gem, I'm referring to this building down the end here, which is the transfer for big garbage containers. Now, I'll be completely upfront. When I first was doing my first look at waste management, I looked at this building. One, to begin with, I wasn't exactly too sure what it did. And secondly, when I looked at the loading unloading bays, you can see here for small it's 1, for large it's 2. I couldn't really think of a reason to use it, to be honest. I thought, well, yeah, it's an interesting building, but it doesn't really seem to have a role in both the collection process. And if I come in here and just click on that little green information eye, what you'll see, it says garbage container transfers. It says, and even this description doesn't really emphasize the sheer power of this building. It says container transfer points are simple waste storage facilities where the waste is stored in containers. This can be very useful because containers are fast to load. When extending the garbage storage facilities, it's advisable to extend it via containers so that you can save time when loading the garbage. So even that doesn't tell you very much. And it wasn't until things started to go very badly in this town that I actually decided to take a look at this, and I discovered the real value of the building. First, I'll give you a bit of a background of what went wrong. Now, two things went wrong because I set this up exactly the same way as I did in the previous section. I set it up, I put in my containers here, identifying the points of concentration where there are problems. Then the waste disposal was to the border, because I thought, wow, it's not that far from the border, so I thought I could get to the border, and things worked quite well. And then I started to develop a problem over here, because one thing I found, and this is a top tip, guys, if you're running a tourist industry, if I come into here and I just put the game on speed, what you will see is that the waste that's produced by hotels really builds up very, very quickly. You can see it here. It's literally just piling up quickly. And that's down to the fact that not only have you got workers in here, you've got these very wasteful tourists in here as well. And the other tip I will say, guys, is this is the reason why I've got these here. It's a very good source of biological waste as well. So if you're looking to find a source which will produce a lot of biological waste for turning into fertilizer, hotels seem to be a good option. Now, the problem I did have is that I really wanted one of these with a road connection with big containers up here, but I couldn't get it in, so I had to settle for a small containers. But it works after a fashion, and you can see how quickly it's piling up. But what you might see is this truck will go in here, and this is an example of how, look at that. So he's literally clearing all the biological waste out in one go, and you can see he's picked up well, he says 0.64 tons of waste in there, because of course these are small containers. But of course we had the big truck that came down here and cleared this one. You can see he picked up 6.5 tons of mixed waste. So that was the first problem, but I thought I fixed it by putting these buildings in. And then of course the winter came. And of course, if you're aware with the game, way the game works is when the winter comes, the road speeds drop dramatically. And during the first winter, what happened was the garbage started to pile up here, and I had red all across the map, especially in these places here, because I even filled up all these. And that meant I got the messages, and the population got very unhealthy. And I was moving to that classic indicator that you've got something badly wrong. That is, my population was dying in this town. The only thing that was really keeping it alive was the fact that I had a surplus of over 21s, but eventually even that started to exhaust. So what that meant is then I actually started to take a good look at this hidden gem here, which is transfer for garbage. And what this actually does, and I've got the setup that I built over here, what you get is, this is the large one because I put the large one in. What you've got is a whole load of large containers which will allow you to concentrate the waste that's being collected. And what you can do is set your technical office to deliver the all the waste from the town to here where it's concentrated. This has many advantages. The first one is obviously I've now got a lot more storage capacity of 195 tons, which then counters the effect of the pile up due to the fact that the trucks can't get to the border. It also makes your local garbage collection trucks a lot more efficient because they're not wasting time traveling down empty roads to just drop off one load. Now, one of the first things I did find was that despite having the two loading bays, that I started to get queues here. This is the reason why I've got two cargo loading bays hooked into it, because this comes with 3 options. I think even the small one's got 3 options which you can use. And the way this is set up is I've got the one on the right is for unloading, the one on the right is for loading. And so what's happening is that the garbage trucks from the technical office are coming down here, dropping off in here and dropping the waste off here. Now, the hidden secret of this transfer garbage process is not very clearly shown here, is the fact that the game will actually sort the garbage that's being delivered, even though this is not technically not separated. So it won't separate mixed waste into separate components. But I don't know if you guys can see here is that we've got a very tiny amount of biological waste in here. In fact, if I let the game run, I'll see if we get a delivery. So if you've got separated deliveries coming in, this actual building will separate the garbage out, or correctly will keep it separate. No, but the key factor here, guys, is see this one coming in. He's just delivered mixed waste. We've got another one coming in. He's just delivered a little bit of biological waste. It'd be nice now if one dropped off some hazardous waste, but of course that's not going to happen. If you've got in here, we've got a bit of a dirty truck coming in here. It's obviously due for repair. Now what you can see is a truck's just come in and picked up the biological waste. And the thing is, you don't need to specify the containers. The game will actually decide and keep the various wastes that's been delivered separate. Now, a variant of this, before I move on to how you actually empty them, is if I come over to here, what I've got here is another one. It's a small one, and this I've set this one to be exclusively biological waste. And what I'm using this as a waste concentrator, and what's actually happening here is that the biological waste from this town, which is being sorted in the various buildings here, is being brought into here. And also, as I kind of alluded to in the previous section, the biological waste is being separated into Irontown. And what I've actually done is set up a bit of a chain. So the local collection trucks here aren't bringing the biological waste down to there. What they're actually doing is dropping it off here. And then I'm using a distribution office, more about that in a little while, was then sending the biological waste down to here. And then what's happening is another distribution office is actually sending the biological waste up to this drop-off point here, which I showed you before. So what I've got is a daisy chain here of these transfer stations moving the waste around. And what this does is it means that you can move the waste around quite efficiently. Now, the reason I haven't got 2 cargo points here is because I simply didn't have enough space because I was retrofitting. This is a way that you can move your garbage around the map over fairly reasonable distances without having to worry too much about having local dumps and recycling, which is what I'll be talking about in part 2. Another example, which is similar to the one that's in Tourist Town, is I've got over here. And what I've done here, even this large town here, what I found is despite the fact that I put in some garbage reprocessing over here, I still found that the trucks were losing a lot of time having to come down here to drop off here. So what I actually did is to improve the efficiency as I set this up here. And again, it's set up exactly the same way as Tourist Town. So what's happening is that the 2 technical offices here are delivering the garbage into here. And then what that is, then I've got a distribution office here, which is actually moving the waste down to the reprocessing plant over there. And that is, I suppose, the next thing I need to show you is that to be able to move the garbage from here, you do need a distribution office. And what you need is to set the distribution office up to pick up from here. As you can see, it's got the separate cargo pickup point. And what you do is you just tell it to pick up all the different types of waste that you're processing. In the case of here, I'm processing plastic waste, mixed waste, not hazardous waste. I'm taking the hazardous waste directly to the hazardous reprocessing plant, biological waste, and metal scrap. So this is all being separated into here. Obviously, it's not all showing up here, but eventually, if we waited long enough, it would pile up here. And what I've done is what's happening is that when a reasonable load builds up, what I will suggest is that if you want to force the loads, is set a minimum pickup point there. But what happens is that these trucks will then go in here, pick up here, and then distribute the waste to the various drop-off points, which are over here. I'm not going to go into this too much because it's out of scope of this section, but what you've got is the hazardous waste is being dropped off here, the mixed waste is being dropped off here, and the metal scrap is being dropped off here.
there's also a pickup point for construction waste. So just to flip back to Tourist Town for the setup there, I'll show you the distribution office in this area here. And it's just tucked in here because it's the only place I could pick up. You can see what this one is actually doing is a slightly different configuration. It's if I let the game run, it's picking up mixed waste, hazardous waste, and biological waste. And you can see the 3 drop-off points here. And that's why I'm quite prepared to go out on a limb and say that this is the hidden gem of your waste management systems. It is a very effective way to both concentrate the waste and also ensure that you can move the waste over long distances. And what that is the first part in a very good logistics chain which you can build up. Anyway guys, I think that's about it. This is where I'm going to leave it. Hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you found it interesting. Any comments, questions, feel free to put it in the video description. So until next time, whatever you do, enjoy your gaming.